I want to start with the Iran deal. It took a decade of worldwide sanctions against Iran to get Iran to come to the table to make this deal, which I know you and the president feel is inadequate. Can you explain to me how you're going to be able to get Iran to agree to a new, tougher deal without the participation in sanctions of China and Russia and Europe?
Well, I think you have to start first with the fundamental deficiencies of the deal itself. It would not stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Quite the contrary, it provided cover for Iran to continue its efforts. And if it had continued, it would have given Iran extraordinary economic benefits without any guarantees of Iranian performance. So the rationale for getting out of the deal is that it was contrary to American national security interest when we entered into it, and it hadn't gotten any better with age.
Can I just poke for 1 second? When you say it provided cover for them to create a nuclear program, you're talking about the sunset provisions that allow Iran, I'm just seeking clarity here, that allow Iran in 7 or 8 years to commence again a nuclear energy program?
Well, I think the sunset provisions were clearly a mistake, but I think Iran had never made a strategic decision to give up nuclear weapons. I think it was testing the limits of the deal's provisions, exceeding them in some cases. Its ballistic missile program, which continued essentially unchecked, was proof that what they were seeking was delivery systems for the nuclear weapons. So the president has to make a decision where America's national interests lie, and it did not lie in continuing this deal. Now, the consequence of the United States getting out of it is to reimpose all American sanctions as they were before the deal came into effect. And I think what we've seen is that Iran's economic condition is really quite shaky, so that the effect here could be dramatic. And I think there's another important point here that the president has made. Because of the deal, Iran was able to take advantage of turmoil in the region to advance its interest all across the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, so that the consequences of being able to sell Iranian oil without restriction on the international market were providing them resources not just for their nuclear program, not just as the world's central banker of international terrorism, but conventional hostilities across the region as well.
Okay, so I take your point on that, but still, the United States imposing economic sanctions is a far cry from the United States and China and Russia and Europe imposing economic sanctions. The U.S. essentially, at least as of now, going it alone. How will that force Iran back to the table?
But we're not going it alone. We have the support of Israel. We have the support of the Arab oil-producing monarchies and many others. And the consequences of American sanctions go well beyond goods shipped by American companies. Because of our technology licenses to many other countries and businesses around the world, as those sanctions kick in, it will have an even broader effect as well.
So President Trump said this week that, quote, any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States. Is the United States going to sanction European companies that do business with Iran?
I think the issue here is what the Europeans are going to do. If they're going to see that it's not in their interest to stay in the deal, we're going to have to watch what the Iranians do. They'd love to stay in the deal. Why shouldn't they? They got everything they wanted from the Obama administration. But I think the Europeans will see that it's in their interest ultimately to come along with us.
With all due respect, I've been speaking to European diplomats, and that's not the impression I get.
Well, that's not the impression now.
They say they're going to stay in the deal.
And they may try to do so, in part because I think despite the complete consistency of President Trump in his opposition to the deal, opposed to it as candidate Trump, opposed to it as President-elect Trump, opposed to it as President Trump, many people, including apparently former Secretary of State John Kerry, thought that we never would get out of it. Now, I don't know how to explain why people could miss what the president was saying. So I think at the moment there's some feeling in Europe that they're really surprised we got out of it, really surprised at the reimposition of strict sanctions. I think that will sink in, and we'll see what happens then. The president's very clear. He wants to discuss the larger threat posed by Iran around the region. And this is what he discussed with President Macron. He's talked about it with Chancellor Merkel. He's talked about it with Prime Minister May. Not just Iran's nuclear threat now, the threat in the future, the ballistic missile programs, and the instability that Iran is causing around the region.
But with all due respect, I didn't get an answer to the question. Is the U.S. going to impose sanctions on European companies that continue to do business with Iran?
I think I did give the answer.
Well, you said
answer,
we'll see.
The answer is it's possible. It depends on the conduct of other governments.
Okay. You've repeatedly pushed, before you were National Security Advisor, for regime change in Iran. I know that that is not the current position of the United States government, but are you behind the scenes pushing for it to become the position of the United States government, regime change?
Look, let me make a general subject on that statement that I've made on other competing networks of yours. I've written and said a lot of things over the years when I was a complete free agent. I certainly stand by what I said at the time. But those are my opinions then. The circumstance I'm in now is that I'm the national security advisor to the president. I'm not the national security decision maker. He makes the decisions, and the advice I give him is between us.
Is it fair to anticipate that the advice you're given is matched with the advice that you gave the United States when you were a free agent?
See my previous answer.
Well, let me ask you about another thing that you've pushed for in the past, which is a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. What might prompt such a preemptive strike by the U.S. government?
Same question, same answer.
Well, this is not theoretical. I mean, it's possible that Iran is going to resume its nuclear weapons program given the United States withdrawing from the deal. A warning to the Iranians about what they cannot do without risking a preemptive strike is certainly within your current bailiwick.
Right, but I'm not going to speculate on what those steps might be. The president has, I think, very clear policies now, both with respect to North Korea and Iran. Those are the policies we're pursuing.
Just yesterday, an Iranian military commander told reporters that Trump's decision would, quote, speed up the annihilation of Israel. Now, Iran is obviously a bad actor in the region, and Iran is responsible for its own behaviors. But I wonder, do you think the U.S. withdrawing from this deal has changed the calculus of the thinking of the military commanders and other leaders in Iran as to being more aggressive when it comes to cyber attacks, attacking Israel, or whatever?
Well, I think they've been plenty aggressive enough under the deal. That's part of the problem. If you look at the enhancement of Iran's strategic position in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, the arc of control that they're seeking to construct with conventional forces all the way from Iran to the Mediterranean. If you look at what they're doing in Yemen to support the Houthi rebels, to gain a position of control there behind the lines, in effect, of Saudi Arabia and the other oil-producing monarchies, they have used the obsession with the nuclear deal to continue to expand and threaten dominance throughout the Middle East. I think getting out of the deal says to Iran, those happy days are over from the U.S. perspective.
Let's turn to North Korea and the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, now less than a month away. I want to talk about the goals of this meeting. North Korea said it intends to denuclearize. President Trump was asked recently what that means to him. Take a listen.
On North Korea, you said you believe in complete denuclearization. What does that mean exactly?
It means they get rid of their nukes. Very simple. They get rid of their nukes, and nobody else would say it.
Okay, obviously, there's a little bit more when it comes to the demands that would be met in an actual summit. There's missile capabilities, there's uranium enrichment, there's international inspections. Can you clarify, heading into these negotiations, exactly what does complete denuclearization mean?
Well, I think the phrase that we've used and continue to use is complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. You can look at some other commitments that North Korea made in the past and didn't live up to as helping to define what that means. For example, in the 1992 Joint North-South Denuclearization Agreement, North Korea committed to give up both the front and the back ends of the nuclear fuel cycle, both uranium enrichment and plutonium reprocessing. So on the denuclearization side itself, that means all aspects of their nuclear program. Clearly, the ballistic missile program, as with Iran, with the intention of being a delivery system for nuclear weapons, that's got to go. I think we need to look at their chemical and biological weapons programs as well. The president's going to raise other issues, the Japanese abductees, the South Korean citizens who were kidnapped. So there are a lot of issues to discuss. Secretary Pompeo and his successful trip to Pyongyang, just returned last week, foreshadowed that. We'll look to see if there are discussions in the next few weeks that lay it out in more detail. But it's an ambitious program, and that's why it's important to test whether, in fact, North Korea has made a strategic decision to give up weapons of mass destruction.
Ambassador Bolton, stay right there. I have more questions for you about North Korea and more, including how President Trump is preparing for his meeting with Kim Jong-un. Stay with us. Ambassador Bolton, we were just talking before the break about the summit with North Korea. I know that you and President Trump have made it very clear that reducing American troops in South Korea is not on the table. So what is the U.S. prepared to offer North Korea in exchange for denuclearization? Is it just sanctions relief? Might there be an embassy in Pyongyang? Might there be economic aid?
Well, I wouldn't look for economic aid from us. I think what the prospect of for North Korea is to become a normal nation, to behave and interact with the rest of the world the way South Korea does. And if you've ever looked at a map of the Korean Peninsula at night or a picture of the North Korean Peninsula at night, the contrast between North and South Korea is the most stark of any.
Lights, darkness.
Exactly. You can't tell North Korea from the Yellow Sea or the Sea of Japan on either side of it. So the prospect for North Korea is unbelievably strong if they'll commit to denuclearization. That's what the president's going to say. I think the vision is clear, and we'll see whether Kim Jong-un is up to it.
A great moment a few nights ago when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo brought back the 3 American prisoners from North Korea. I do want to point out, in 2009, when former President Bill Clinton went to North Korea during the Obama years to argue for the release of 2 American journalists who had been captured by the North Koreans, you wrote in a Washington Post opinion piece, quote, "In Pyongyang's view, the 2 reporters are pawns in the larger game of enhancing the regime's legitimacy and gaining direct access to important U.S. figures. So the Clinton trip is a significant propaganda victory for North Korea, whether or not he carried an official message from President Obama." Was that different from what Secretary of State Pompeo did, bringing home these 3 detainees? Was that not also a propaganda victory?
Well, it's a fair question, but the answer is it is completely different. Because of the president's maximum pressure campaign, North Korea has come to a point that they never reached under any prior president. And I think what they did here was concede that holding these 3 Americans as pawns in a propaganda game wasn't getting them anywhere. So they came out without precondition. It was the right thing to do. But it's really because of the different policies that North Korea faces from the United States, I think, that they made that decision.
Don't President Bush and President Obama deserve at least some credit for imposing economic sanctions against North Korea that, in tandem with what President Trump did, helped create this moment?
Well, let's be clear. From the U.S. perspective, there have been stringent economic sanctions against North Korea ever since the Korean War.
Right. But they've gotten worse and worse.
What we've done internationally over the years is ratchet up the pressure, but they've never reached the level, particularly of Chinese cooperation, that Kim Jong-un has faced. And I think the combined effect of all that, together with having a wretched internal economy to begin with, has brought us to the point we're at now.
How is President Trump preparing for this summit? Obviously, he is somebody who prides himself in deal-making, but sitting across the table from Kim Jong-un is going to be more different from anything he's encountered, much different from Chuck Schumer, much different from Nancy Pelosi. I mean, I can't
I'm sure they'd be glad to hear that, too.
But I don't think you disagree with it. But I mean, this is something that he's never faced before.
Well, and neither has any other American
Right.
president. So his preparations have actually been extensive already. He's talking to a lot of different people, foreign leaders. He had an extensive conversation with Xi Jinping of China earlier this week. He's consulting with all of his advisors. You know, I've been on the job about 5 weeks. I would say that Iran and North Korea have probably taken up over half of my time, and a lot of that obviously is helping him make the decisions and get ready for these meetings. So I think his preparations are very intense. People have said, well, you can't prepare in such a short time for such a momentous meeting. I had exactly the opposite reaction when I first heard about it. There's real utility in bringing these 2 leaders together, let them see each other and decide, in our case, whether we judge that Kim Jong-un has made a strategic decision to give up nuclear weapons. Dragging this out just gives the North Koreans more time, if they are dissembling, to continue to make progress on their ballistic missile and nuclear programs. Let's get the 2 leaders together and see what happens.
Let me be optimistic and say that he achieves some sort of treaty agreement. Is it then worth President Trump bringing it to Congress to affirm the treaty, to vote the treaty into law, which would, of course, be a complete contrast with the way President Obama negotiated the Iran deal, and would give it the added benefit of making it so the next president can't undo it?
Well, it's entirely possible we'd proceed that way. We're still thinking about the different alternatives, so I wouldn't want to foreclose the president's options. But it's been one of the criticisms of the Iran nuclear deal, to be sure, that a deal of that level of consequence was not given to the Senate, as many people think the Constitution provided.
I want to ask you about Senator John McCain. In a private meeting this week at the White House, the information leaked out. Special Assistant to the President Kelly Sadler reportedly joked that McCain's opposition to CIA nominee Gina Haspel didn't matter, quote, because he's dying anyway. As you know, Senator McCain is battling brain cancer right now. It's a pretty horrific remark. You've worked with Senator John McCain. My understanding is you have a decent relationship with him. How do you feel about that comment, and why won't the White House apologize?
Look, I wasn't in that meeting. I don't know what was said or what was done. I'll just say this. John McCain came to my defense in 2005 when my nomination to be UN ambassador was under criticism. He and I didn't know each other very well at the time. We certainly didn't agree on each and every position that he or I had taken, but he spent countless hours trying to help me out, and much of it was behind the scenes. There was no political upside for John McCain in that effort at all, but he did it because he thought I was being treated unfairly. I'll never forget it. I'll be grateful forever, and I wish John McCain and his family nothing but the best.
Meghan McCain said, the thing that surprises me most is I don't understand what kind of environment Kelly Sadler's working in when that would be acceptable and she could come to work the next day and still have a job.
I've just given you my view.
But doesn't the White House have an obligation to apologize for this horrific remark?
I've said what I'm going to say on the subject.
All right, Ambassador John Bolton, we really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. We hope you'll come back.
Glad to be with you.